This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there, welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. In the course of the hour, we'll run through the business news stories you need to know about from the continent and beyond. But first, a quick run through the markets. So heading into the holidays, the JSE indices are set to close out a really strong year. The all-share index is up over 20% so far in 2021. It's beaten out all the other bourses we track on the program except for Ghana's composite. That actually has gone up by nearly 45%. On the last trading day of the EGX 30 this week, that index closed 1% higher, taking its year-to-date rise to around 8 and a bit percent. The index is on course for its best year since 2017, according to Bloomberg data. Medinet Nasser, it's a real estate developer in Egypt. It was the most heavily traded counter today, closing 6% higher, but the bulk of gains in the index came from the Commercial International Bank of Egypt. Here are your headlines tonight. Tunisia hopes to unlock funds with the IMF come 2022. President Joe Biden pats himself on the back for cutting backlogs in America's supply chain. And the Rwanda National Park is looking to expand in order to accommodate its growing population of gorillas. All that and more is coming up in a bit. But let's start up north in Tunisia. The country's central bank governor has expressed some optimism on the odds of reaching an agreement with the International Monetary Fund in early 2022. But economists say that the country does need to implement some much needed structural reforms before any kind of deal can be agreed to.
Tunisian Prime Minister Najla Bouden said her government started developing a draft agreement with the International Monetary Fund on a new program which is expected to send positive messages to foreign investors and friendly countries and help Tunisia improve its sovereign rating.
Tunisia has no choice but to put in place a concrete reform plan in partnership with the IMF. The government cannot provide financial resources from international donors if it does not reach an agreement with the IMF.
The Tunisian government intends to devise an economic salvage and recovery plan. The economic reform program will be discussed with the IMF in 2022. It will be based on a participatory approach, which involves all national organizations and economic sectors.
The problems facing the Tunisian economy are structural. The IMF urges the government to negotiate with all its social partners so that the urgent economic reforms are not blocked by social unrest. Tunisia needs a new social pact which guarantees stability. Otherwise, the reforms will not happen and the economy will not rebound.
The Finance Ministry announced that consultations between the Tunisian government and the Bretton Woods institution have already started.
The negotiations with the IMF will take place amid an unprecedented economic crisis in Tunisia. Therefore, the authorities will make many sacrifices. The government needs to convince the population that the reforms are necessary. Otherwise, it will not be able to implement any change or reform.
Authorities in Tunis plan to cut the public sector wage bill to 15% of gross domestic product from 17.4% in 2020. The government also plans to restructure the debt of state-owned companies and to impose the gradual removal of subsidies on food, electricity and natural gas by 2024.
Prime Minister Najla Bouden and the governor of the Apex Bank declared that Tunisia has always met its foreign financial commitments. The central bank and the government are working jointly to present a Tunisian project to the IMF in the first quarter of 2022. Abdel Shawashi, CGTN, Tunis.
Now, just over a week from now, Ethiopia's exports to the United States will no longer enjoy duty-free, quota-free access to the world's biggest economy. Now, the move was announced in early November by President Joe Biden. In a letter to American lawmakers, he said that Ethiopia was not in compliance with AGOA given, quote, gross violations of human rights, end of quotes. Now, the conflict between the federal government and the TPLF in the north of the country has been running for 13 months now, with millions of Ethiopians at risk of starvation. TPLF forces, in fact, have been pushed back into Tigray province. January 1st is now just 8 days away. If AGOA access is indeed revoked as planned, what effect would that have on one of Africa's most populous countries? I explored that with Zemedin Enegatu some hours ago.
As of now, because as I said earlier, Ethiopia just started in that path only a few years ago, compared to the potential of what the AGOA benefit would deliver for Ethiopia, is still relatively low in terms of exports. I think the focus is forward-looking. In other words, if the trend continues, large FDI into these industrial parks and other Ethiopia's productivity increases in other areas that export to the United States, you can see that something like the $200 million or so in AGOA exports today could top $1 billion in just a few years, maybe 3-4 years. Ethiopia could top $1 billion, even more.
It almost sounds like you're agreeing with Charles Robertson at Renaissance Capital, because when this story broke in November, in a note that he sent out, he said, I mean, this looks, in his words, this sounds worse than it actually is, because the data does show that roughly 7% of Ethiopia's exports around 2018, 2019 went over to the United States. And a certain percentage of that, wasn't the majority, that actually got into the market based on AGOA eligibility. So arguably the harm, at least in the short term, might be limited.
Right. So my good friend Charlie, I saw his comments. I think we need to put these things in perspective, meaning at the moment, compared to the potential, it's true, the export is relatively small. But Ethiopia is just getting started. And that's, I think, what we need to focus on. Let me put something in context, though. Even today, there was a study, a report put out by the American Chamber of Commerce in Addis in Ethiopia about 2-3 months ago. I actually participated in a press conference and they released that data. Today, 200,000 Ethiopians directly benefit from jobs linked to AGOA exports, 200,000. Of those, it's mostly in the apparel industry. Of those, I would say 90%, 95% of them are young women. A lot of them are mothers. This is their first job, probably, a formal job. And secondly, they have now become the primary paycheck earner for their family. In fact, they might be the sole paycheck earner in their family. So even as we said, the potential in the future is what we're focusing on. Even today, what's on the ground is generating 200,000 jobs directly, and then another 1 million jobs indirectly. So what we're talking about is already the 1.2 million Ethiopians who are now, whose jobs, whose livelihood is linked to Ethiopia's AGOA eligibility and continuous participation.
Given the scale of the economic damage, the human cost, for lack of a better word, that would be implied by cutting off AGOA access. I mean, this does seem like a self-defeating move by the United States, because it doesn't really advance any efforts to try and get a resolution, for lack of a better word, to the civil war up north.
Ramah, excellent point. And this is what many of us have been trying to convey to policymakers here in Washington, the executive branch, as well as in the legislative branch. And we've been lobbying very hard to indicate to them, here's the United States giving $1 billion in aid to Ethiopia every year. That's the official figure, to help Ethiopians bootstrap and transform their lives and other humanitarian, $1 billion. But on the other hand, how does this benefit the United States when you're going to put 1.2 million Ethiopians out of a job? You're going to put them in permanent unemployment.
So let's assume, for the sake of argument, that the White House doesn't change course and AGOA access is essentially revoked on the 1st of January 2022. How will that affect the price competitiveness of exports from Ethiopia, considering the fact that the country is not a member of the WTO?
So let me give you an example. So a T-shirt, all things being equal, a T-shirt manufactured in Bangladesh or Vietnam, compared to a T-shirt manufactured in Ethiopia, enters the United States at about 20, 25, 30%. I don't know the exact number, duty advantage. So a $10 T-shirt on a rack in the shelves here in a big department store, if it sells for $10, made in Ethiopia, a Vietnamese or Bangladeshi T-shirt will sell for $12.50 or $13. That's a $2.5, $3 difference. That is big. Okay. Now I'm simplifying it just for explanation purposes, because there's a lot of other factors that go into the price determination, the logistics, the efficiency, and all that. Now, so the thing is, if Ethiopia is given another 3 to 5 years, the efficiency of the factories in Ethiopia can actually match or maybe even exceed what we see in other Southeast Asian countries. Because Ethiopia actually has no competitor in this sector in Africa. So I'm not using African countries as an example. I'm looking at Southeast Asia and Vietnam and Bangladesh because big garment manufacturers and those things. So that duty-free advantage actually is extremely important.
Let's get into some corporate headlines now. South Africa's health regulator is our starting point. It's approved the use of Johnson & Johnson vaccine for a second dose or a booster. Now, this paves the way for the shot widely used in South Africa to shore up protection against the Omicron variant of COVID. The country has now surpassed the peak of the current wave of infections, driven by the significant decline in the populous province and epicenter, Gauteng. In the meantime, the US has approved Pfizer's oral antiviral COVID-19 pill for at-risk persons aged 12 and above. That makes it the first at-home treatment for the coronavirus and a potentially important tool in the fight against this fast-spreading Omicron variant. Data does show that Pfizer's antiviral regimen, Paxlovid as it's named, was 90% effective in preventing hospitalizations and deaths in patients at high risk of severe illness. An investigation has been launched in the United States into more than 500,000 Teslas, which are equipped with touchscreens. This comes after a complaint was filed by one user who apparently discovered he could actually play games on that device while driving. The U.S. National Highway Traffic Safety Administration is expected to look into some 580,000 cars. That spans the Model 3, the Model S and the Model X from 2017 to the current day. And finally, the popular video sharing app TikTok has surpassed Google to become the most visited website on the planet. According to Cloudflare's 2021 year in review, TikTok initially reached the top of the worldwide traffic rankings back in February, followed by a few more days in March and in June, and then a more permanent stay in late August. TikTok skyrocketed in popularity during the pandemic, reaching 1 billion monthly active users in the month of September. That's the run through your company headlines. Time for a short break. You're watching Global Business Africa. Here's what's coming up. Tunisian citizens will have to produce a vaccine passport before using public and private transportation. And there's little cheer in Nigeria as high prices dampen the festive mood. We'll have the details when we come back.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business, only on CGTN.
So this is it, I'm just about to be shot.
Tents here, bottles are being thrown as they do so.
There are about 3 critical bridges here in Malawi. That's one of them, we're going to cross that bridge.
As you can see behind me, police forces
who are replying with gas. Gas just came in.
Tear gas, so it's all begun now.
Divisions leading the charge into West Mosul have brought us here.
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots.
This is where most of the fighting has been concentrated.
Is the front line now after 9 days of fighting?
We're about 2 to 3 kilometers from
the front line. Within clear view of this front line position.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN. See the difference. Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN. Welcome back to the program. You're watching Global Business Africa. We're now barely a week away from the end of a large global debt relief program, the Debt Service Suspension Initiative. You might have heard it being referred to as DSSI. Now, if countries did choose to take part, their debt service payments essentially were paused starting from the 1st of May 2020. By the 8th of December, according to the World Bank, the DSSI program had delivered at least $10 billion in relief to over 40 eligible countries. Now, with the program coming to an end, debt payments essentially are now going to be resuming in about a week. The IMF's managing director, Kristalina Georgieva, has warned that not only would low-income countries struggle to service their debts, some may even be facing economic collapse. So clearly on that basis, 2022 is getting off to a rocky start. But does the end of DSSI spell certain doom for highly indebted economies in sub-Saharan Africa? I explored that some hours ago with Mark Boland from Red Intelligence.
Applying for the G20 Common Framework does not automatically mean that you are in default. So Ethiopia has applied for the G20 Common Framework, but is still not declared to be in default because it's still not clear what this entails. They're very close to the default rating from the actual credit rating agencies, but they're not in default. But I think, to your point, it's clearly the desire of the IMF and the World Bank and other creditors that, for the early debt restructurings for countries to restructure the debt rather than having these very long extended periods where they more or less cut off from finance, but they're still servicing the debt and there's still no new money coming in. So I think, the IMF, World Bank are clearly pushing some African countries that way. Just the other day, the IMF more or less declared that Djibouti's debt was not sustainable. I don't think they will be applying for the G20 Common Framework. Most of their debt is with China, so it's going to be a kind of bilateral situation for that. But it was also a statement about Mozambique, which I think is that they're very close to essentially the debt not being sustainable. They need to take quite drastic corrective action for the debt to remain sustainable. So I think Mozambique is one of the top candidates for applying for the G20 Common Framework, and Ghana not too far behind it.
What is it about the G20 framework and the way it's set up that makes it unappealing for countries? Because one of the criticisms that has been coming out, in fact, even from the IMF's managing director herself about 2 or 3 weeks ago, was that she said, look, the G20 framework right now needs improvement. But how? What exactly needs to be changed there?
So one of the points that both IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva and the World Bank President David Malpass have pushed for is an immediate standstill on external debt servicing at the application of the G20 Common Framework. So what's happened now is these countries like Ethiopia have applied for the G20 Common Framework, and that has led to an increase in their external Eurobond bond yields, but it's been very far before there's been any actual benefit from this framework, because it's taken time before they can come to any agreement with their creditors, and bilateral creditors like China have been unwilling to suspend their the payments of the debt servicing without that being met by the private sector. So if you actually have a situation where there's an immediate standstill on all debt, whether it being bilateral or commercial debt, at application of when you apply for the G20 Common Framework, that will bring more immediate benefits to countries to apply for this. So that's the thought that is behind the recent moves.
Let me just stick with Zambia as we walk through this question of debt restructuring, because now they essentially have
a new government in place. They have an outline of a deal with the IMF. But a common thread through this entire conversation seems to be that one party of creditors, like the Eurobond holders, for example, are not willing to make certain concessions because they say, look, why should we take the hit? And yet bilateral lenders are not taking a similar amount of pain. Is that the same reasoning that's essentially driving this hesitancy that we're seeing in other markets towards getting to the G20 common framework? Because different creditors just don't want to essentially take pain unless everyone is doing the same thing.
Yes, I mean, you could kind of turn the coin around and say, China has also said that they are not prepared to do, they're also unwilling to, they've been against the DSI, essentially saying that, why should only we be the only one suspending external, debt servicing payments, because the majority of bilateral debt service, bilateral lending, which is what the DSI covered, was from China. And these countries continue to service their private debt, commercial debt throughout the DSI period. And it was quite clear early in DSI that any kind of debt relief from the private sector would be voluntary. So, I mean, this is common issues in any external debt restructuring. So it's not surprising that this has taken such a long time, but it also means that the benefit from the DSI has been quite marginal. And largely fallen on China.
Away from the business of public debt, let's head over to Tunisia. Citizens there will now have to present a vaccine passport in order to board all public and private transportation. A presidential decree imposed that passport taking effect from the 22nd of December. Many Tunisians, however, have voiced their complaints about these restrictions.
The National Interurban Transport Company imposed vaccination requirements for public and private transport users. All commuters need to present their immunization document or show proof of vaccination.
No one is allowed to access the public and private transport stations without holding the vaccine passport. We trained our agents on how to deal with the commuters. We will not make any exemptions in order to protect public health.
Some people have welcomed the government decision, urging unvaccinated citizens to get their first jab in order to resume a normal life.
Now going anywhere, including to a bar, restaurant, cafe or a nightclub, requires a vaccine passport. This is a good measure to push people who are still reluctant to get vaccinated. I fully understand the government's decision. Everyone should get a vaccine pass.
However, many citizens who have criticized the mandatory immunity passport say it's difficult for businesses to adhere to the new COVID-19 restrictions.
This vaccine pass is important for public health, but it's disastrous for the economy. More than 50% of the population is not vaccinated. If all these people are not allowed to shop or go to restaurants, then all businesses will lose clients and money. The vaccine was supposed to help and not shut down businesses.
The Scientific and Technical Committee at the Health Ministry announced that its online platform for vaccine passports was blocked for several hours on Thursday, when tens of thousands of people connected to the platform. The Ministry of Communication Technologies launched a temporary text message service to solve the system breakdown problem.
Tunisia widens vaccination pass restrictions to curb the COVID-19 surge in the country. The health minister said only pregnant women and patients are exempted from presenting the coronavirus vaccination pass to access private clinics and hospitals. Aden Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Still on vaccination policy, but this time in Ghana. Ghana's authorities have declared December as a month of vaccination in a bid to contain the fourth wave of COVID-19. The health service over there says that this vaccination program is targeted at specific groups and they will make sure that the vaccine is available in a broad range of places, nightclubs, beaches, restaurants as well. Now, there's been a level of vaccine hesitancy in Ghana, but with the Omicron variant spreading rapidly across the world, Ghana's government is encouraging the country's citizens to get vaccinated. CGTN's Ridwan Karim Deni Osman reports from Accra.
Desmond Amoa rolls up his sleeves to receive a COVID-19 jab at this vaccination center in Accra. He says it is the fear of being infected with a recently discovered coronavirus variant, Omicron, that has pushed him to get the shot.
I see it as a defense for myself against the virus. So I've just taken the step to get myself vaccinated, and with the hope that it is what I need to stand against the virus.
More than 132,000 cases of coronavirus have been confirmed in Ghana since the pandemic began, and more than 1,200 deaths. But while the World Health Organization says Ghana has one of the best COVID-19 testing programs in Africa, like most nations on the continent, vaccination uptake has been slow, despite an increase in supplies over the last few months. Here at the Adabraka Polyclinic, officials are recording low turnout due to vaccine hesitancy. They say misinformation and myths about the vaccines are still circulating among the public.
Actually, when we started vaccinations, we were doing between 500 people a day. That was like our peak, during our peak. But when the low turnout came in, for instance, these people could be here in a day, they might do just like 50 people a day.
So far, just 6 million people out of the country's population of 30 million are vaccinated. Ghana's health service says pockets of vaccine hesitancy pose a risk to meeting the target of vaccinating 20 million people. While in the Volta region in eastern Ghana, nearly 13,000 vaccines expired during the last vaccination campaign, a figure significantly above the national average.
If we had left it there without monitoring, we probably would have had more expiring. So we did redistribution quickly when we were about 2-3 days even to expiring. The fact of the matter is that there's real hesitancy. I mean, there are elements of hesitancy. And so we think that high-level people should be able to support the region to overcome that.
Authorities have this month introduced a vaccination drive ahead, introducing a mandate for targeted groups, including government employees, health workers, security officials, and students at the end of January.
We have a whole subcommittee on communication that is working on all kinds of strategies to get the information appropriately to the people. So we've done jingles, we'll be playing them. Some media stations have even started playing most of the jingles already. We're also using satisfied clients, the voices of people in high places and so on.
According to the Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, many African nations are still struggling with hesitancy and the logistics of accelerating their COVID-19 inoculation campaigns. Only 6.6% of Africa's population of 1.3 billion is fully vaccinated. Ghana's government hopes its vaccination program will change enough minds to make achieving a safe level of public immunity possible. Redwan Karim Dini Osman, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
In many parts of Nigeria, the Christmas holidays tends to be a time to feast with family and friends while exchanging gifts. But Christmas in 2021 is a whole different ballgame. Many feel that this year there's little or nothing to share with neighbours. Last year's crash in the price of oil, which is Nigeria's main export, led to acute shortages of US dollars, and that put a lot of pressure on the Naira. And it's left the population yearning for stability, both in prices but also in exchange rates. CGTN's Alexandra Majala has more.
At a crowded market in Nigeria's commercial capital, Lagos, 27-year-old Blessing Abba negotiates the price of a turkey and other food items. Abba, like many people, is shopping for Christmas. She paid 2,500 naira for the turkey, up 25% from 2 months ago, while the 10 tomatoes she used to get for 200 naira are now reduced to 7. A harsh reminder the prices in Africa's biggest economy are still rising sharply, even though inflation has eased.
For Christmas, shopping now is a whole lot because things are more expensive than before. I mean, last time, 2 months ago, I came to market with 10,000 naira and I went home with a big bag. But right now, I'm going home with just 2 bags because things are more expensive than before. I mean, for tomato, we could buy like 10 pieces for 200, but now we're buying about 8 pieces or 7 pieces for 200 naira.
The rising cost of living is leaving no sector untouched. Owuza Shady, a tailor, has doubled the price of some of her clothes in the past 2 years to keep up with escalating costs of fabric and sewing tools.
So 2 years ago, the price of making this outfit would usually go for 25,000, 20,000 naira, but now, just 2 years after, it would go for 35 to 40,000 naira for the exact same style. And this is because the cost of fabric, sewing materials in general, are now way more expensive than what they used to be.
Nigeria exited recession last year, but growth is fragile, and the International Monetary Fund says recovery will be subdued as the West African country grapples with double-digit inflation, dollar shortages, and the COVID-19 pandemic. Last year's crash in the price of oil, which accounts for more than 90% of its foreign exchange, led to acute shortages of forex and put pressure on the naira currency.
I would hope that the economy of our country is more stable. Stability is what I hope for, because right now everything is up and down. Prices are going up, coming down, fluctuating. The value of our naira is not growing or falling at any pace at all. So if things are stable, it's easy for us to see where we're going. Right now, nobody knows what's happening.
Dollar shortages mean traders are forced to buy forex in the black market at a higher price to pay for the goods they sell, passing on the cost to consumers. Alexandria Majala for CGTN.
We're just past 18:30 GMT. Time for another break. Here's what's coming up next. The US president is patting himself on the back for alleviating backlogs in the US supply chain. And Indian legislators want a lot more consultations before introducing cryptocurrency regulations.
Change is on the horizon. Through the shifting of time, Africa's emerging tech landscape is creating new channels.
There's a hunger for local African content globally.
Shaped by innovation, carved out by a new generation of digital entrepreneurs, sculpted by a mobile revolution, and trickling down to the most remote corners of the continent. TechSpot is seeking out the new concepts in technology, disrupting Africa's traditional sectors.
You're watching breaking news on CGTN.
Welcome to the world today on CGTN.
No one again, he can hold in guns. Machine guns from police forces toward the protesters.
Were you worried about your life at that particular time? Not at all.
The Excellency, thank you very much for your time now. What is your assessment of the state of the continent today?
Africa has the potential to power itself.
Excuse me.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads.
we celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
I try to not let it affect me, but there are days when it does. I'm a human being, and to see patients in a hospital bed and their family members are not there, there's no one there to hold their hand, that human touch, you know?
I just hope everyone can remember that the situation is not permanent and that everything will get better eventually.
Welcome back to the program. Let's recap some of the stories making your headlines at this hour. At least 5 people have been killed after a cargo aircraft crashed on Thursday in the Shabunda territory in the eastern part of the Democratic Republic of Congo. That cargo aircraft was from Goma, the capital of the North Kivu province. It crashed in the village of Kalehe, killing at least 3 crew members and 2 conveyors aboard. Reports say bad weather was likely the cause of this tragedy. A drop in Omicron cases might signal South Africa has actually passed its most recent COVID-19 surge, according to medical experts there. After a high of nearly 27,000 new cases nationwide on Tuesday, the number of new cases dropped to around 15,424 on Thursday. Daily virus counts, however, can be a bit unreliable. They can be affected by reporting delays, uneven testing, and a range of other factors. South African scientists were the first to report, record, and identify the Omicron variant of COVID. And finally, Nigeria has destroyed over 1 million doses of out-of-date, essentially expired COVID-19 vaccines. The batches expired in November. Authorities say they were donated by some international donors just a month before their expiration. Just 2% of Nigeria's population of 206 million are fully vaccinated. Health officials have set a pretty ambitious goal of vaccinating more than a quarter of the population by February. That's a run through your headlines. Away from the continent now, the US President Joe Biden is taking credit for alleviating backlogs in the country's supply chain, which had threatened to delay critical deliveries around the holidays. Now, this came during a virtual meeting on Wednesday with leaders of his supply chain disruptions task force, as well as business leaders. Jagruti Dev has more from Washington.
Keeping shelves stocked and goods moving. These were the White House's goals ahead of the Christmas holidays. And as US President Joe Biden met with his supply chains task force and private sector CEOs, he said this mission has been accomplished.
Earlier this fall, we heard a lot of dire warnings about supply chain problems leading to a crisis around the holidays. So we acted. We brought together business and labor leaders to solve problems. And the much predicted crisis didn't occur. Packages are moving. Gifts are being delivered. Shelves are not empty.
The CEO of transport company FedEx said He was optimistic that most Christmas presents would be delivered on time, although he said that the issues were not all solved. Now, the COVID-19 pandemic has largely contributed to bottlenecks in global supply chains caused by a variety of issues, including a shortage of truck drivers, as well as manufacturing components such as semiconductor chips. The shutdown and then reopening of global economies, as well as the soaring demand for goods, has also put huge amounts of pressure on global shipping and delivery systems. So under pressure to act, the Biden administration created a supply chain task force in June, and in October it announced that it was working with major companies and ports such as the Port of Los Angeles, which said it would operate a round-the-clock service in order to alleviate these bottlenecks. The White House says it is now monitoring the possible impacts of the new Omicron variant as well. Jagruti Dave, CGTN, Washington.
All right, then. So that, of course, was the US president dealing with supply chain issues. Let's head over to India now. India's winter session of Parliament ended before scheduled on Wednesday without a proposed cryptocurrency bill being tabled. Now, the government is seeking wider consultations with stakeholders before it brings in regulations to handle cryptocurrencies, which have young investors in the country hooked. Radhika Bajaj reports from Mumbai.
This is the bill which is now being proposed, and this bill is, once the cabinet clears it, it will come here into the House.
The much-anticipated bill regulating investing and trading in cryptocurrencies will have to wait for India's next parliament session in February 2022. The bill is expected to prohibit all private cryptocurrencies, regulate crypto investments, and create a framework for an official digital currency by India's central bank. Siddharth Sogani, who runs a ratings firm focused on crypto and blockchain, has been part of the group of stakeholders that the government has been consulting with.
We proposed that the SEBI, which is the Securities Exchange Board of India, which regulates the exchanges, they are well equipped and they understand how exchanges work, so they can regulate the exchanges. Exchanges can be the reporting bodies to the SEBI, and also in order to monitor the inflow and outflow of Bitcoin, because it is very difficult to determine how much Bitcoin is in circulation in India, right? So there has to be one regulator which keeps a tab that 10,000 Bitcoins are in the market today, right? So RBI can be the one which monitors the in and out.
By some estimates, India has the largest number of cryptocurrency investors in the world at 100 million. Most are under 35 years of age. The government has expressed concerns over cryptocurrency being used for terror-related activities as well as money laundering that's leading to capital outflows. An increased number of scams have also proven to be red flags. Experts in the field say that regulation will have a positive impact on the growing interest in cryptocurrencies in India. They say a framework where frauds are detected and prevented and fraudsters are held accountable is the need of the hour. Globally, $7.7 billion worth of cryptocurrency was siphoned off from victims in 2021. In India, the Enforcement Directorate is probing at least 8 crypto-related frauds. Smaller scams are often not investigated. Experts feel that the government needs to consider all pros and cons thoroughly, even if it means a delay in bringing in regulation.
So intent was either we improve that bill.
We as a country are not prepared. We should take our time, understand the whole thing, because definitely there are many positive things about it. I don't have to pay money to the banks for the transfers. I don't have to wait for my funds to come from abroad or to make my payments abroad and, bear such huge amounts. So I think we should so there are many benefits also. So I would say the government should study it and then regulate it.
About the misleading advertisements.
With rising cases of misleading advertisements, the government is also looking into advertising standards that can prevent investors from being fooled. Presently, there is a lack of both awareness and regulation that leaves cryptocurrency investing in India ambiguous and sometimes also dangerous. Radhika Bajaj, CGTN, Mumbai.
Let's turn over to Mexico now. Despite being pretty badly hit by the COVID pandemic, its capital and the surrounding metropolitan areas become a lot greener as a result of a growing trend of urban farming. CGTN's Alistair Baverstock has that story.
Maru Mena from Mexico City is ready for the holiday season.
In Mexico, in December, it's traditional for us to eat turkey or roasted ham, which is always accompanied with pasta.
But when it comes to much of the preparation, she doesn't need to head to the supermarket. Her vegetable patch on the roof of her house, her project since the start of the global pandemic, provides her with nearly everything she needs for her Christmas feast.
From my garden, I can take rosemary for the bird, basil for the pasta, and fennel for the ham. I have grown Brussels sprouts and lettuce, enough to feed everyone.
Indeed, in the Mexican capital, which enjoys a sunny climate even in December, Maru is by no means the only green-thumbed city dweller getting ready for Christmas. Urban farming took off here in Mexico City during the global pandemic, not only because people avoided leaving their homes for any reason, but also as a hobby which promoted healthier eating habits, a foundation for a strong immune system during a global health crisis. At Huerto Romita, where an environmental group teaches hobbyists the basics of urban farming, demand for director Nayeli Real's services has quadrupled since March 2020.
Esta necesidad humana de acercarte y conectar con la tierra.
There's a human need to feel a connection with the earth, and growing our own plants is a spiritual activity. During the intense city lifestyle, it teaches us that not everything has to be fast, that the best things in life take time.
Su tiempo, ¿no?
For Maru, it's a passion that will keep her busy long beyond December and the COVID-19 pandemic, regardless of how long it drags on.
Living in urban spaces, we have forgotten about the most basic and natural things. Planting a seed and then watching it grow is the most marvelous thing I have ever seen. And being able to eat what you produce makes it even better.
Alistair Baverstock, CGTN, Mexico City.
Ski hills in the Alpine German state of Bavaria will open this weekend with COVID-19 precautionary measures. After nearly 2 years of severe pandemic-related disruptions, including full closures last year, skiers can once again hit the slopes and enjoy some fresh powder, provided they are fully vaccinated or they've recently recovered from a COVID infection. Natalie Carney has more.
The covers are once again coming off Geiskopf ski slopes' modern 6-seater open-air chairlift in anticipation of this weekend's opening. These popular hills in the Bavarian forest usually welcome more than 100,000 visitors for year-round sports. But the cancellation of last year's ski season due to the COVID-19 lockdown cost this family-run business about 60% of their annual revenue.
Yeah, last year was really tough for us because we have summer turnover, but the winter turnover is still like 60% of our turnover for us. And if you lose 60% of your turnover, no business is coping with that well.
Yet Poschinger Bray is skeptically optimistic about the upcoming season with the opening of Geiskopf under 2G regulations, meaning guests must present a certificate of vaccination or proof of recovery from COVID-19.
I think for most people in Germany or in Bavaria, it's normal that they are under a certain 2G rule, for example, so they're used to it. They can just come here, they can show their certificates, they get their tickets.
In southern Bavaria, the beautiful ski region of Alpenwelt-Karwendel also acts as a gateway to the bigger slopes on the Austrian side of the border. But COVID-19 restrictions have made quick day trips between the two countries much more difficult.
At our region, a closure of the ski hills means that there is about 80% less turnover, because our guests only come because they want to go skiing in our area. If both of these skiing areas are closed, people don't know why to come.
Across the Alps, winter tourism dominates local economies, which have been hard hit by nearly 2 years of corona-related disruptions. Bischofsmais, where Geiskopf is located, just came out of regional lockdown following a surge of infections as Germany battles some of the highest COVID-19 numbers it's seen since the pandemic began. This continues to make it difficult to operate.
From a business point of view, we see this as an issue because if, for example, only 10 or 20% of people really end up then skiing from usual amount of people, it means that we cannot operate that in any profitable way. And then actually it's actually better to not open at all.
The winter sports industry is used to overcoming challenges, be it not enough snow or COVID-19 closures. Yet with low vaccination rates across the country, COVID-19 travel restrictions and fears over the Omicron variant, this year could present yet another bleak winter for many. Natalie Carney for CGTN in Bischofsmais, Germany.
Right, then a quick update on commodity prices. So oil is our starting point. Oil prices are closing in on that $76 a barrel mark in today's session, up 6% so far this week. At these levels, prices are essentially back to where they were in late November, despite the implied hit to energy demand, seen to come from a surge in Omicron infections in markets, especially in Western Europe and the United States. So far in 2021, Brent futures are up by 50% compared to the 13.5% decline we saw over the same time frame a year ago. Oil is not the only one having a blockbuster year, though. Copper futures up over 60%. Cocoa futures, however, different story there. They're slightly negative for 2021. Here's what's coming up next. A national park in Rwanda is looking to expand in order to accommodate its growing population of gorillas. That story is coming up next.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
I've been Shirushi, Tunis, Cairo, Juba, Johannesburg, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Qanater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Welcome back to the program. Now, a growing population of mountain gorillas is both cause for celebration and concern in Rwanda. Located on the Rwandan side of the Virunga Mountains, the Volcanoes National Park has seen a rise in the number of these primates over there. But authorities now say that the park needs to be expanded in order to accommodate that growing population of silverbacks. As Tatal has that story on Grassroots.
Rwanda's Volcanoes National Park is considered a conservation triumph. The park has managed to increase their population of mountain gorillas. In 2010, a census carried out by the park recorded 880 of the primates. In 2015, 1,063 mountain gorillas were recorded. But the growing population has posed challenges.
The interactions themselves changed in the sense that they became very violent, and during this period, we recorded 7 silverback deaths. So that's, again, a consequence of more groups ranging in the same area, really not expanding and going to the rest of the park, and that leading to more intergroup interactions and then more infanticides.
In an effort to combat this, the park is looking to expand.
So we are aiming in the next 5-10 years to expand the park by 37 square kilometer, which correspond to 23% increase of the effective habitat of the park. And as part of this process, we are going to relocate people, estimated around 4,000 households.
Authorities say they will compensate displaced families, housing them in newly constructed model villages. A prototype is already visible in Musanze, a district which contains the largest part of the Volcanoes National Park. Astatal, CGTN.
Right, then a quick run through the currencies. So as we mentioned about 30 minutes ago, the DSSI program ends in roughly a week. It's delivered about $10 billion in savings to some 40 countries. But even that program didn't quite meet its full potential. Take Kenya, for example. We now know that the country only got around $90 million in debt relief for the second half of the year, compared to the estimated benefits of close to $380 million. Kenya's debt stock has already blown way past the 8 trillion shilling mark. That's roughly almost $71 billion total. And to be clear, Kenya has not applied for debt treatment under the G20 Common Framework. To date, only Chad, Ethiopia and Zambia have done so. That's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. As always, we'd like to hear your thoughts on the content you've seen on the program in the last hour. Many ways to get your thoughts back to us, all of them on your screens right now. I'm Ramah Nyang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Thank you for your company in the last hour. The World Today is up next from Washington.